Welcome to the E6S Methods podcast with Jacob and Aaron, your weekly dose of tips and tricks to achieve excellent performance in your business and career. Join us as we explore deeper into the practical worlds of Lean, Six Sigma, project management, and design thinking. In this episode number 189, we review an article by David Niles about securing a seat at the top for Six Sigma. Is it a basic need, or is it just nice to have? If you're just tuning in for the first time, find all our back episodes on our podcast table of contents at E6S-methods.com. If you like this episode, be sure to click the like link in the show notes. It's easy. Just tap our logo, click, and you're done. Tap, click, done. Here we go. Hey, Jacob, how are you?
I'm good, Aaron. How are you doing?
Jacob, I am doing well. Jacob, let's talk about a seat at the table for Six Sigma.
Ooh.
Securing a seat at the top for Six Sigma, and this is yet again another article from my hoard of articles that I've been hoarding. This one is 2009 iSixSigma magazine. Blow the dust off. It is very much in the antique. Not only is it a print edition of iSixSigma magazine, which no longer exists, it is written by a gentleman named David Niles, who is the president of SSA and Company.
Nice.
A Lean Six Sigma consulting firm, pretty much the original Lean Six Sigma consulting firm. However, I don't think that exists much either anymore. Maybe just in name, but they've abandoned most of their Lean Six Sigma stuff. So this is...
I'm thinking they're still doing a lot of consulting. They
are doing consulting, but yeah, I think they've branched off into other areas.
Sure.
It used to just be Six Sigma Academy, and that's how they got the SSA, and then they've merged and branched off. The original founder, who was Michael Harry, who was also the co-creator of Six Sigma at Motorola, created that company and then sold it off a couple of years ago.
Got it.
Or maybe a decade ago. So, yes, an old article.
Excellent.
But let's see if it still holds true. So I secured this article when I was a master black belt for North and South America at the chemical company, and I was wondering, hey, how do we get more leadership engagement for Lean Six Sigma? And it's how do we show senior executives how we can solve these big business issues?
All right.
I don't know if you ever heard this, but Lean Six Sigma sometimes has a reputation of being too rigid and bureaucratic and requiring too much of an investment in training and just taking too long. You ever heard anything like that?
Yes, and sometimes I say it myself too.
Why would you say such a thing?
Well, if people ask for me what's the difference between a Six Sigma and a Lean methodology, and that's one of my differentiating points, where you need to become a statistical expert to be proficient in the Six Sigma tools, or some of the critical tools that are purely in Six Sigma, whereas for Lean, it's more of common sense and understanding the guiding principles.
Mm-hmm.
So from that aspect, totally, you need it is very rigid, and in many cases, again, it all depends on who the user is. If you try to use every tool in the book, it is definitely rigid. and
it's also a large hump to get over as far as an investment in training, right?
Yes.
Because the complexity of some of the tools, the rigidity, I don't want to call them rigidity, but I'll just say complexity of those tools, it takes a lot longer to teach them, and it's kind of an inverse relationship between how long it takes to teach and its immediate applicability to your job. So basically...
I totally agree, right? And then, if I add more to that, and then this comes, I was reading an article recently where the discussion was, is Six Sigma still relevant?
Mm-hmm.
Especially as a strategy for a company. Is it even a strategy? Which is kind of similar to the topic which we have on hand here, securing a seat at the table, at the top.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So is it a strategy? And, I think the article was trying to highlight that many of the people who are doing the projects don't necessarily end up needing to use any of those higher level statistics. It depends on a project by project basis.
Right.
Most of the organizations are looking for that quick wins. And for most of the quick wins, you don't necessarily need any of the statistics. You should be able to get the low hanging fruit very easily without that. Mm-hmm. And by the time you get to the real complex problems where you need, not just the higher level statistics or the details and the statistics and the data, and it also needs time. And most of the organizations, once the low hanging fruit is gone, they don't want to invest the time and resources in
Right.
in making sure you're addressing or relieving all the big challenges that the business exists. And at that point, they don't see the return on investment and they give it up.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And getting back to the training part, we train everybody the same way as if they will all use these complicated tools.
Yep.
So 100% trained for maybe, especially in the early part of deployment, maybe 5% of the people will use 5% of those tools. I mean, it's a very small percentage that actually have to be used. And as a matter of fact, for early deployment, you're actually doing a disservice if you spend the time on these tools, because more than likely you didn't need them. You got to that low-hanging fruit just by looking at it. That you didn't need to do a two-sample t-test. You just look at it and say, yeah, no, that's different.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about what it means to secure a seat at the top here for Six Sigma. There's like three main areas in this article: is align Six Sigma with organization's strategic goals, deliver results quickly, and think like a CEO. So what do you think? Align Six Sigma with strategic goals.
Again, it depends on, I don't know how do you align Six Sigma with strategic goals, but to help execute on the strategic goals, you could leverage some of Six Sigma in different formats, depending on what sort of strategic goals you have.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I would leave that. I don't know. Otherwise, again, for me, Six Sigma is a piece in the execution piece. I'm not sure if it's more strategic.
Yeah, I think it really means executing in line with
the strategic goals.
What is the strategic goals? So if you're strategic goals. So one of the issues I have with this is it's most people think they're talking strategy and most people are not. Mm-hmm. And I've actually had a hard time
differentiating,
aligning leaders with
yes.
strategic goals. Basically, anybody who's not the CEO or C-suite, and by the way, I've never gotten close enough to the C-suite to be able to align really with their strategic goals. All I have gotten were, okay, this is what the C-suite said, this is how we interpreted it, this is what we want you to do. And my experience is by the time you get outside of the C-suite, they're already bastardizing the strategy because they don't want to turn away. Part of the strategy is deciding what you're sort of not going to do, and that also means cannibalizing and giving up some of what's currently profitable in your business. And there's just too many, as you cascade down the line, there's too much of people not willing to do that, and so you do get stuck doing pretty much the same old thing when you're actually trying to transform. It's a little bit aggravating. So it's kind of like a chicken and the egg as far as getting a seat at the table. I don't think a Lean Six Sigma can actually be aligned with the strategy if they don't already first have a seat at the C-suite table.
Yeah, I mean, in our previous life in the chemical place together, at some point I felt there was a seat at the table at the strategic level.
Mm-hmm.
But it never meant anything. It was more of, hey, you are going to execute on what I tell you to, sort of a test, sort of a thing, more than anything else.
Yes, and it was executing on
whatever I told you to.
Yeah, it wasn't a strategy. It was tactically, yes. Here, go work here.
Yes, or fix this problem. Yeah.
So I guess that's still aligned. Assuming that it was a cascading sort of goals thing. But you just have to assume that it was aligned with a strategy. And most people I find when they work for a company, they don't know what the strategy is.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's the strategy is so simple that they don't think they know. And they usually find this out by people saying, "What's our strategy?" It's there, but I think it's not very well communicated and very clear to as you go down the line.
Agreed.
So it's hard to know if you are aligned. So that's why I say go to the source. If you want to be aligned with the strategy, you have to really go to the source and really understand what that strategy is.
But then, that brings a different point, right? Do you really need to be at the source to understand that? Or is it just a case of the strategy being communicated much more clearly? It's like the same thing when we talked about any sort of product requirements, right? what is the need? Is it a customer that needs something? Do we understand what they want, or are we just doing what we feel like we want?
So let me ask, along with that, if a company cannot communicate its strategy effectively,
yep,
how likely are they going to have the wherewithal to keep going forward with a Lean Six Sigma program?
Oh, no, totally agreed.
And I think the ones who would be both at either should be good at both.
Yeah, I mean, so that's my point, right? I don't think you need to be able to articulate. I mean, as long as you can articulate it, I don't think you need a seat at the table.
Got it.
But I think the challenge is not every company is good at articulating that or making sure everybody in the organization understands it clearly. So
say we got C-suite hanging around, they're going through their strategy, and a person at the table says, okay, where do you think Lean Six Sigma should focus this year? Mm-hmm. Do you think that's an appropriate level for that, or they just say, you got Six Sigma, you figure out where they should focus? Is that the message that the C-suite should send?
No, I don't think so. I think the C-suite should be, this is our biggest challenges for the year. How are we as a team going to address that? Mm-hmm. Or this is our big goal for the year.
So it should be a topic of conversation. If you are leveraging Lean and Six Sigma for your transformations, then...
But then, that's kind of the piece, right? I mean, are we assuming that the organization needs to transform every time? Or is it more like we have a strategic goal of getting here? How is anybody and everybody going to contribute to that? And if there is a gap, or if there is some area that needs significant sort of improvement or changes that needs to get there, is Six Sigma going to help you get there faster?
Right.
That's the question that should be asked. And I don't think the C-suite needs to ask that, in my opinion. I think the business owner needs to understand, or the person who is there needs to understand, how is this going to help? And they have to address it appropriately. Can I leverage this to do that? Okay,
so does that give the idea that you should have a seat at the table then? Somebody who knows and can translate the strategy into...
I guess at which table, right? I think that's the question now. Does it have to be at the C-suite table, or can it be 2 layers down? Again, if assuming that the vision is clear.
Yeah. So this guy is... I do. And, I've been 1 or 2 layers down. And I think that the leadership 1 or 2 layers down has not been aligned with the leadership 2 layers up. So that's why I want to go.
No, and I can totally agree with that sometimes.
Yeah. But also the idea of a strategy, it's not supposed to change every year, right? So
it's a long-term
so Lean Six Sigma, it should be a year-over-year focus. Okay, we this year we focused on this. It helped this part of the strategy. Now let's start to focus in some of these other areas where we may be weaker, or there's a new opportunity over here.
Yep.
And so the assumption is that if you have a Lean and Six Sigma program, that you will leverage that program because you have highly engaged full-time workers who are skilled at going into some place uncomfortable with very little definition, and they figure something out. And if you don't have that, though, if you don't have highly trained, if you've maybe stacked these people in with just, I don't know, free resources because you couldn't find a good fit for them anywhere else, then, you're not going to rely on these people at all. As a matter of fact, you should be wondering, why are we doing this program? All right, so let's talk about deliver results quickly.
I mean, I think for any business, right, at the end of the day, you can't, if you have a project like we've talked about a long time, if you have a single project that's long-term, chances are the momentum goes down. The buzz of the day changes, or the flavor of the day changes. So that's something that needs to, I don't think you can ever have a project that's going on for too long. So yes, I would agree results need to be there quickly, but at what cost?
So let's talk about what constitutes results and what constitutes quickly.
Okay.
So, and let's even consider the difference between Lean and Six Sigma at this point, and then let's talk about what could be the root causes for not delivering quickly enough.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about results. How big do results have to be in order for the C-suite to say, yeah, this was a good investment?
significant.
Yes.
It depends on the organization, right? And I think that's the mindset difference, right? Like I have, put a program together, invested in doing this. How am I getting the return back?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how they're looking at this. So I dedicated a resource for 3 months, 6 months. I should at least cover the cost of that and maybe more. Otherwise, why would I have to do this?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I would, if I were a C-suite or a manager, that's kind of what I would look at. And I think that's probably one of the toughest parts in here.
So I think if you want quick results, then you would bypass most of those more difficult tools that we teach in Six Sigma, right? Because they take longer. They're a little bit more complex. You require data that is usually not readily available, and you validate that data more than you would any other way. But if you just stuck with those, top 7 Deming tools or top 4 Deming tools, and then with Lean, you would get results much faster, but they could be smaller.
But then that's the difference, right? And this is where, I would challenge the mindset, because it's not about doing a project once. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the difference in Lean. If you're just doing for the sake of doing a project, then, don't call it Lean and don't call it Six Sigma. You're just doing a project. Whereas in reality, what Lean is trying to push is, how do you make that incremental change regularly? Mm-hmm. Day in, day out, how do you go about doing that? So it's not a project never ends, if you so call it, in a lean atmosphere. The people working on the project are continuously going to try and work and improve that, or you're enabling them to continually work on it and improve that. So I think that's the philosophical difference. Six Sigma is more project-based for the most part, whereas Lean is more ongoing, longer term, right? Or living and breathing all the time. It's never ending,
But the companies seem to like episodic grand slams every single project, yes. And this whole moving slow to move fast, it's just not sexy, and they don't like it so much. And do you secure a seat at the table by having a very slow grassroots cultural shift, which maybe eventually somebody might need to use a actual statistics in in one of their projects?
I would hope. but that's wishful thinking, right? I mean,
right.
that's where. So I mean, if you look at it, right, organizations that have been doing it well for a while, it's because of that. Like GE, Motorola, for the while they were at that top doing this was because they invested heavily in this and they believed in it, and this was part of how they worked. Not necessarily, I'm doing one project and it's done. Now, what changed over the longer term? I don't know how to answer that, or I wasn't in the C-suite to be able to explain that. But that's why they were successful for that long periods of time, because that was not just a means to get somewhere. That's how they worked, and that's what they believed in.
Yeah, and there were also some technical businesses there, and so we have to also consider that. But they were also very dogmatic as far as DMAIC was concerned, compared to a lot of the DMAIC that I see coming through. And that's another one of those things that you put DMAIC in place because you don't want to slip back and just do the shoot from the hip sort of approach of trial and error. But that dogma, that framework, purposefully slows you down so that you don't go, too fast in the wrong direction. Yep. But then, well, now it's too bureaucratic. So which is it? What's the balance? Mm-hmm. That was a question.
I think, I know it's a question, but I was just acknowledging it. But in general, I think that is how much of an appetite do you and your company have?
Right.
I really think it comes down to it. Now, it also begs the question: does every project need to go through that, or are there ones that are, again, low-hanging fruit that you don't need to force it through a system? You just go do it.
Yeah.
You have those ones too.
There are plenty of those, and we've said this before. But usually, when a leader thinks it's a just go do it, it's usually not as simple as the leader actually thinks it is.
Totally.
So I'm going to back up though and say, and because I think it's actually very much a misconception that it's the framework that's bureaucratic. Yes, there are things that are dogmatic, but the dogma of the phase gate system, stage gate system, or the toll gate system, that has never been the thing that I've seen hold projects back. holding projects back has always been the fact that only about 5% of the team, or the team is only available like 5% of their time to actually work on the project. It's a lack of dedication and nothing else in my mind.
I would say that part of it could be also at some point there needs to be a decision that needs to be made. And whoever the decision makers are, they're not around or they're not willing to make the decision. That's another big reason why I see projects probably take longer than they need to.
Yeah, and it's so when I say lack of dedication, I mean I guess I meant
you're talking
to
about
that project. Cause
you're talking about people rolling their. I mean, my point is, even if I have people rolling up their sleeves and willing to dedicate, like in a Kaizen event-ish style, okay, let's drop everything and let's do this. At some point, they're probably not empowered enough to make the decision. They're still the go figure out the solution and let me know what it is, and I'll tell you how we can go. I'll tell you yay or nay.
Yeah, and that's still a limitation in my opinion, but yeah.
That yay or nay never happens or takes a long time.
Yeah, but I was also considering the fact that a program could have 10 projects, but if those 10 projects keep tapping the same 5 people, you're only going to get 1 or 2 projects done. Plus, these people have their own regular day jobs.
Yep.
And because a Six Sigma Black Belt is a full-time resource, most of the team members look at that full-time resource and say, "Hey, this is your project.
This is your job. Why are you making me do this?"
Exactly.
Yep. Been there, heard that.
You are listening to E6S Methods Podcast, brought to you by E6S Industries. Join us on our website at www.e6s-methods.com. Journey through success.
Are you applying for professional certification in your field? You'll be happy to learn that all this time you've been streaming Jacob and me into your ears, you've also been earning continuing education units, or CEUs, which can be applied toward most professional certifications. You can do your research, all the math, and figure out which episodes are applicable for which discipline, or you can save yourself the time and hassle and just order a CEU report from us. All you need to do is provide us with which episodes you've listened to, and we'll provide you with a portfolio including details about each episode and a certificate of recognition with a CEU breakdown by competency, including leadership, tactics and tools, strategy deployment, and principles and philosophies. So if you have certification on the mind, start here and save some time. Just go to e6s-methods.com/CEU to order yours. So deliver results quickly. How do we do that? To secure a seat at the top.
That's when you cut corners. Unless you found a easier way to get through that.
I think that's so there's 2 ways to get there. One is to cut corners, and then when you cut corners, you start showing benefits that aren't real and maybe not sustained. Or people look at it and say, well, how did you come up with that? And it's like, oh, we did this, this, and this. It's like, well, how is that different than what you would have done had you not gone through the training? And then somebody said, well, we put it through this DMAIC framework. Yeah, so...
So, what you brought is a very good point, right? Like, especially the first one. Like, okay, what did you do and why did you do it? And what impact did it bring? In many cases, it's all soft benefits. And nobody is ever challenging it or looking into, okay, you're saying this is soft benefit. When does it ever convert itself to a hard benefit?
Right.
And unfortunately, we've been through this a lot. Most of the hard benefits that if you ever need to get to a project is through headcount reduction. Unfortunately, that's how most people think.
Well, that is how accountants think, and that's kind of how variable accounting works, right? That it's the truth that headcount reductions are what give you the fastest, most immediate financial benefit. However, for most organizations, that's a more painful. First of all, it's painful for your program because people say, screw this, I'm not doing that program anymore. I'm not helping you. You screwed me over for the last time, or you screwed my friend over. Just get out of here. Most of the time when we free up a resource, there's plenty of other work that's just not getting done in a company. So, but the problem is, if you're expecting a bottom line hard savings, you're not going to want to redistribute these resources, reallocate.
Yep.
So that's.
I mean, that's the cost avoidance part, right? I mean, yeah, if I didn't free up this resource, I would have had to hire another person to do it. So if that's something that you can prove, absolutely, that's a good thing. But in many cases, it's not.
Yeah, no, I was thinking more about work that's actually exists already but is not getting done.
Okay.
But you're right. You're right. There's always the phantom expansion of work that hey, if we didn't do this project, we would have hired another person.
Yep.
If somebody looked at the budget and said, no, you wouldn't have, because it's not in the budget.
Exactly.
you would have had to figure out some work that you should not do. And honestly, that's part of it. They have to figure out some work that they stopped doing. That's part of having a seat at the table.
Possibly.
Strategy. We can't just forever expand on low margin products.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so yeah, it's tough. Anyway.
Yeah, I would leave it at that.
Think like a CEO. So what does a CEO think like? What do you think?
Make more money? No, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about, how do I reinvest or how do I pay back the shareholders if it's a publicly traded company, or how do I make more money for the organization? I mean, that's really what the CEO is thinking. And in doing that, again, some CEOs might be thinking, how do I bring value? What do I do? Otherwise, what is my return on investment?
Yeah, the only thing the CEO thinks about, that's their job for a publicly traded company, is to make sure that the street sees them favorably, sees the company as favorably, meaning growing in revenue and growing in profit at the same time, which means revenue, it basically means not throwing good money after a little bit better money. It means growing the revenue with pretty much the existing resources that you have, or at least growing faster than you need to add cost.
Yep.
So it means taking cost out, so top line and bottom line, or at least the perception that you're doing top line and bottom line, and that's why CEOs do all kinds of very large promises, because a promise is good enough to change your stock. to change, so we're going to do this next year. It's like, oh, everybody buy, and then all of a sudden your stock looks great. It doesn't matter if you do it. You bought yourself another 3 years for good investments, but you really, at the end of that, should be delivering. So thinking like a CEO, how is this going to look from the street? But you got to deliver. And in this thing, it says, most projects are $250,000 to $500,000. It can be difficult for senior executives to see how Six Sigma can solve problems that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And an improvement leader's job is to help them see the forest, not just the trees.
Yeah. I don't know. I just feel that's a whole bunch of words.
Well, it is a word, but here's what it assumes. It assumes that, I guess, CEOs can't do math. How many projects do we need to have that are, $500,000 worth of hard savings? Let's just say hard savings, even though they're not. In order to really achieve on the mega millions of savings that they want to have, this is saying that you need somebody with a little bit of know-how in Lean and Six Sigma to help translate what Lean and Six Sigma can do for the company, and to speak directly to the C-suite to translate that information.
That I can see. But then making promises that, you can, again, this is where things fail, right? I mean, if my only goal is to save the company money, or that's just the wrong way on how you're going to address any of the challenges that you have.
Say more.
I mean, in my opinion, it's always, why do I need to save the money? I think it's explaining the why. That's the most critical part. It's either to reduce the defects, or it's either to increase customer satisfaction, or it is something. If I have my goals more aligned towards that, in most cases that should translate to some sort of dollar somewhere, because of the amount of hidden unknown work that we all do that is causing all the pain. If the CEO or anybody is just looking at the hard dollar saved at the end of the day, and maybe it's the perception, it's a communication going backwards, and what have we done differently, and how is it making our lives better and easier? That somehow never, either it's not cared at that level, or it's never communicated in that format back to that level.
So here's part of the issue, and the fact that a program like this will always have to
defend itself.
Defend itself, right?
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
It's because if everybody's doing the right thing, if everybody's aligned with the strategy, including the Six Sigma program, and you fix all these things, you got a great customer experience, you're getting all these accolades, your brand recognition is going up, your revenue is ticking up organically the way it should. Nobody says, thank goodness we had Six Sigma here to help us do this.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Why? So let me ask you the question, why?
Mostly because everybody wants to claim a little bit of credit for themselves, and they do. They should. If we were actually all aligned, we should all take credit, and we shouldn't care. But at some point, when you have a pure overhead program, you look at this and say, well, nobody can say Six Sigma helped with that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't directly tie, and that's what all this entire industry is built on, is directly tying the P&L outcome or stock price, shareholder value, back to the projects that you did for that year, that's when you start running into these bad behaviors of over-reporting savings because we would have spent that, but we didn't now. And soft savings that never go anywhere, and hard savings that sometimes cut a little too deep because we really wanted a hard savings.
Yeah.
That was that response. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. The reason why I say that is I don't totally agree with that, but yes, that's what ends up happening.
Which part don't you agree with?
That it is always quantified for revenue or as savings. I mean, maybe I'm just contradicting myself, so I'll just keep quiet.
But you do agree that Lean Six Sigma program constantly has to prove its worth.
Yeah, I mean, the reason what I was saying was, in an ideal environment when everybody's aligned and everybody's doing things the right way, I would almost question, do we even need a Six Sigma program then? Because in that format, everybody's either learned the tools or is capable enough to do it, to handle things their way. So I don't need a separate program to make sure everybody's in line or everybody's doing what it is. At that point, I am equally part of the team that is driving what is necessary to be done. Maybe I'm part of the team that is focused on getting the improvements done. So I'm aligned with a particular team as a resource in that team, not a separate independent business unit that is being challenged to prove your worth.
Yeah, I don't see how it would differentiate. I mean, you can still have a PMO sort of organization, but everybody is still working along with the strategy, but the PMO is working on the projects that tend to bridge the different parts of the business units. I think in a lot of ways it does make sense to have some independent practitioners, but when you become mature, and if you had a good rotational program, if you become mature, then yes, you don't need necessarily to rely on those practitioners for their speciality in the tools or how to execute, but you would rely on them more for the breadth of what they can see in the business, or on a project that you just don't have the bandwidth to take on yourself.
Sure. No, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I agree, and it's a very different conversation depending on where you are in the maturity curve for a Lean Six Sigma program. And I ran a couple models as I'm trying to put together my book, and the knowledge within a Lean Six Sigma program, as far as what I have put as a measure of mastery, barely reaches 40% in the first 15 years. And that, I know that's like... You got anything else left to add?
Totally agree.
All right.
I can easily believe
Thank you very much.
They scratch the surface, but after that, they're like, okay, this is either taking too long, or this is not what we expected out of this, or we don't have the right team for this, or it's just not in our culture to support this.
Or this crap's really hard.
Yeah, that too.
Or why would we rely on a junior project manager to take on such a huge undertaking?
I don't think that's ever the case. I think it's the junior project manager is not good enough. I don't think it's the person coaching that person or the individual himself. He or she is not probably the the best one to do this? I've never heard that question asked. Why do I have a junior person doing this big thing?
That's what I think is probably a rhetorical question that's underneath. So we have this Lean Six Sigma department full of experts that other more senior people would have to rely on for their expertise and trust that their expertise is better than they maybe themselves would be able to do.
Yep. No, that's true.
And that's a tough pill to swallow. So I guess the point is there, don't fill your Lean Six Sigma program with just junior people who are like 5 years out of school and don't have enough relationships. You should have some hierarchy in there too, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I've never thought of it that way, but yeah, that makes sense.
Or maybe you just have a rotating specials project department. I don't know.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some way to put highly capable people to work on projects if you need them to. If you need to remove them from the regular day jobs, highly capable people to work on extremely important projects so that the company can continue to move forward. So I know we've gone off the rails as far as securing a seat at the top for Six Sigma. So what do you think? Let's bring it back to there. What do you think about securing a seat at the top for Six Sigma?
I don't think it's necessary as long as everybody in the organization clearly understands what the goals are of the business. I definitely feel that it's critical to think about how is this program aligned within the organization and how can we start sharing results and being transparent in what's going on. At the end of the day, you have to think from a cost-benefit perspective, right? What am I investing in this and how am I going to get it back? Mm-hmm. If that means thinking like a CEO, then absolutely that. But again, that's all how to manage your program. To the topic of do I need a seat at the C-suite table? Maybe if that's what it takes to get the commitment to sticking to something and making sure that we drive it to completion, maybe yes. Otherwise, I don't know if it's critical.
So I guess I'll take a... Clearly, it's not critical because most companies are doing it without a seat at the top, right? At the same time, I think most companies are not certainly not getting the full benefit that they would.
Yeah.
There's huge problems in managing the project portfolio. Most companies have way too many projects going on, and they're just not concentrating on the right ones. They're not aligned with strategic goals. They're just cleaning up old problems. So, but if you are a CEO and you are telling the street, we are going to transform our business this next 5 years by creating this new Lean Six Sigma program, if you are doing that, then I think your next step should be to create a seat at your C-suite table in order to drive that as hard as you can for the next 5 years. If you are not, if you are just saying, hey, we'd like to learn some Lean Six Sigma to improve our quality and customer service and go tackle projects here and there whenever they come up, and it will allow them to be a self-governing body. If you're not using that to make a promise to the street, then sure, just let it manage itself, and hopefully no layoffs come.
Wow, I like the end over there.
I always like to end on a high note.
Excellent.
Jacob, you got anything else left to add?
No, that's it. I think we've talked a lot about this.
All right. Thank you very much, Jacob.
All right, Aaron, have a good one.
Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to episode 189 of the E6S Methods podcast. Don't forget to click like or dislike for this episode in the show notes. Tap click done. If you have a question, comment, or advice, leave a note in the comments section or contact us directly. Feel free to email me, Aaron, Aaron, at e6s-methods.com, or on our website. We reply to all messages. If you heard something you like, then share us with a friend or leave a review. Didn't like what you heard? Join our LinkedIn group and tell us why. Don't forget, you can find notes and graphics for all shows and more at www.e6s-methods.com. Journey through success. If you're not climbing up, you're falling down.